Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to call to order this special meeting. And Commissioners, it was brought to my attention from our city clerk that we do have minutes to approve. Not that I'm not sure how many of us remember this, but we have minutes from our special meeting that occurred on May 7th at 9 a.m. So I'm going to ask for approval of the minutes from our last special meeting.
So move.
Support.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, we have one item before us today, and the reason we scheduled this special meeting was because we had a time limit where we had to make a decision by 4 o'clock today to allow our city clerk to do what he needs to do in partnership with the county to move this forward if it's going to move forward. After that, we'll have public comment. I will go ahead and then move to the item that we postponed from our earlier meeting today, which is not an action item, it's just a discussion item, an update. I'll turn to our city manager for that. And then we will close down and adjourn this meeting, and then we have to go back into executive session, Commissioners, because we have another item that we didn't have enough time to get to this morning. And so City Attorney, I don't need to call another executive session since we approved that earlier, right? We can just go back in?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So with that, we'll start with the first item. This is a resolution placing a charter amendment for a Parks Millage proposal on the November 5th, 2019 ballot. Can I get a motion?
So moved?
Support.
All right, Commissioners. So this item was brought before us several meetings ago. I see Mr. Mike LaMonaco, who presented to us at that time, is here in the audience today. We had at that time, we scheduled a public hearing. We had a public hearing at our last meeting where we had quite a few folks from the community come out and express their support and also just provide feedback on that proposal. And now it is back before us today to make the resolution to place it on the ballot. So, City Clerk, go ahead.
I just want, from the last meeting when I was asked some questions, so I want to just clarify, it was in the memo, but just so we can clarify. So with Headley rollbacks, the 2019 levy was 0.9475. The medium home price rounded up is 110,000, which is a taxable value of about 55,000. So at the current rate of the 0.9475, it's about $52 annually, and at the 1.25 mils, it's $68.75 annually. So the increase would be about $16.64 for median home price. So that was the information that I couldn't do in my head at the last meeting.
All right, that's helpful, good to know. So roughly, I think in general, those of you who are familiar with campaigns, usually they'll do an average of 100,000, 50,000, and so those numbers are very similar, I should say.
Yep.
But thank you for that additional detail. All right, so Commissioners, I'll open it up for questions or comments. I know we have, as I said, some individuals in the audience. If we do have specific questions for them, we can get to that, but hopefully all of your questions have been answered. So I'll turn it to all of you for discussion or questions. So, Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, I'm obviously very excited about the opportunity to continue investing in our parks, pools, and playgrounds here in Grand Rapids. It's been brought to our attention that there was some concern about it being an evergreen millage, and the last millage was a 7-year sunset with an opportunity to go through this renewal, and so just like to have a little bit of discussion about what the benefits, the pros and cons of doing it evergreen versus allowing for it to sunset and continue to have an opportunity to monitor the results of how we invest those taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, great. Mike, do you want to speak to that? Or? Sure, I can. Okay.
So, thank you, Commissioner. From our perspective, this is really, having an evergreen allows for a base of support for parks maintenance, pools, and certainly programming going forward. These are ongoing costs, and a permanent millage really, we feel, makes sense. There are several accountability measures in place. If the only accountability measure is taking back to the people for a vote every 7 years, then we feel we have some bigger issues as we talk about accountability from a city spending and investment perspective. And specifically, I'll talk about the administrative guidelines that we passed in the last millage, and we hope will be adopted in a similar fashion this time around. And that being around, having a dashboard of transparency, having the Parks Advisory Board, which is a citizen-led board, having an annual review of the spending and the priorities as such, and working with the commission and the staff on that, and to engage the community, continually engage the community around funding. The other part that an evergreen allows is for long-term visioning. One of the pieces of feedback we've received from the community and from leaders is having to look, more short-term, 3, 5, 7 years, has oftentimes put us at a disadvantage as we look to more long-term opportunities we have. That can be in leveraging other funds. As we know, this current millage, we've been able to leverage an additional $16 million in funding from other grants and foundations. So again, having the opportunity to be more long-term in that, and to provide long-term asset management and maintenance, specifically, we feel is a better route to go. And it also sets a foundation and expectation that we have this money secured long-term. The citizens of Grand Rapids can at least count on that going forward, and then whatever contributions can come from the general fund and any other capital.
Thank you. Mike, thank you. I didn't know if you were planning to speak today, but I appreciate you coming up and answering that. But I'll add a couple thoughts I have, because I remember having this conversation when the idea was brought before us we were asked to put it on the ballot in November. So a couple points I'll add is that evergreen millages for parks, they actually are not all that unusual. So I missed the last meeting because I was in Denver at a Greater and Greener conference put on by the City Parks Alliance. So I had a chance to talk to quite a few folks from other cities about their parks department and how they maintain them and how they're sustainable. And a lot of cities have evergreen millages for their parks, knowing that there will always be ongoing costs because of those assets, particularly if you want to ensure certain funding for programs such as making sure our pools stay open. The other benefit is that if there is a significant capital improvement and you want to bond for that improvement, if you have a millage that is longer term, you can do some larger investments knowing that you'll have funds for 10 or 15 years to pay off those bonds. If that's a decision that this commission or a future commission makes, they'll have that. So there are some larger positive aspects. And then bottom line is that we've heard from a lot of folks in this community that parks are a priority to them. And when it comes to millages, I've said this in the past and I'll say it again, giving the opportunity to the voters to make that decision, I think is really important. And we've heard from a lot of folks too who have young children and they want to make sure that the parks are in good shape for the entire life of not just their children, but their grandchildren. So, other questions, Commissioner?
Well, as somebody with young children, that's something that I care deeply about, but I'm very supportive of this. But I did want to ask, because I wasn't around the table when the last one did pass, but how did those kind of governing rules get written for the last one, and what does that process look like?
Well, I can speak to that. I don't know if others want to, because I was around this table and I was a pretty vocal advocate of those guidelines being put in place. I think we're in a different place now. We have a new city manager now than we did at that point. Initially, with the first Parks millage, I think there was concern from the community that the city would reduce their general fund support, and they didn't want the Parks millage to be basically an opportunity for the city to bait and switch, basically. And I think the time was very different. There was a real commitment for capital, knowing that we had so many needs in the community around capital investment, and wanting to make sure that there was general fund support for that maintenance. But also early on when we were talking to community, and I served on that committee, people really wanted the city to be tied to their commitment to continue to support parks. And so there was a lot of conversation just to make sure that, there was that, if we're going to commit as a community and as voters to put in money, you have to also support general fund. And you saw some of that conversation when we were talking about extension of the income tax and making sure that there was still general operating support for our streets. And so again, I think that really set a precedent for that conversation. Commissioner?
So I had an opportunity to meet with the residents who are bringing this forward, Neighbors for Parks, Pools, and Playground, and I too was around this commission table when we went through the recession, and many of us, probably, even if you weren't on this commission, were out spreading chips
Volunteering.
and painting playground equipment,
Yeah.
and very upset that we had maybe 8 or 10 employees for our entire system. I know some of our employees were pretty emotional about that too, when they had to lay so many people off. But what became very clear to me was how valuable our residents consider our parks, particularly around pools. And as it is, I still get complaints that we have only 3 pools rather than 6 pools. I think people are pretty happy with the splash pads, but still, those neighbors who have to go a distance to get to one of the pools, it's hard. The other thing that happened during the recession is, I think, we saw the library begin to be used. People could not afford to purchase books. They could not put that money aside. They were trying to save their homes. And so we start to see our public spaces used. So I think long-term, whether we're in good shape economically, and these cycles come and go, and they will continue to come and go, perhaps even more rapidly because of our global economy. To have some certainty around the parks, I think, is important, because again, that's space where we come together as a community, which is really important. It's also space where we can go when you can't afford to go to an incredibly expensive movie. And as you know, I've been advocating that we have opportunities in the parks for people to have family reunions, to get married, that sort of thing, because as we talk about equity, that's certainly a concern. The other thing I recognize, having met with the folks who are organizing this effort, is that they did some polling, and then there was support for the evergreen portion of this, for an evergreen millage. So that speaks to me. I understand that there will be some that don't want to be an evergreen millage, but I do think, again, that there's so much support for this that I think it makes sense for us not to have to come to the table over and over again, but have that basic level of service. And as we have seen, similar to our streets, our vital streets, by putting in place an oversight committee of citizens, then we manage this asset in a way that we can get to a place where we can maintain it, and we don't get to that place where we were before, where you couldn't open a bathroom, we didn't have pavilions, and the parks were in terrible condition. We were, I think, a D in terms of national ratings. So we're not at an A yet. Not even sure if we're at a B. Not at a B. We're at C. But we're in pretty good shape, and we're on the path. So I do think 7 years is very, very short time. I mean, it flew by, and we certainly haven't achieved all of our goals. We still haven't addressed the whole recreational piece, which I think is very important for our kids and our seniors, for everybody, for families. So I'm very interested to hear what other people around the table have to say, but those are my observations.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I too am looking forward to supporting the millage, and I actually think that the parks in particular play a role that in many ways it transcends race and class, and I know that there have been a number of studies that have spoken to the utilization of parks and green space, and those very places not being utilized as much by African American and Latino communities. I think that we have an opportunity to be very unapologetic and I think rather aggressive in our efforts to try to get more people to take full advantage of it, simply because of all of the benefits, whether it's how they influence the health and the well-being of an individual, how it affects one's mental health, but also a place in which you can have, I think, real diversity at play, where you have people of all ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds who are in this space, all occupying it for different reasons and having an opportunity to really engage in real community. And so I also think our parks serve as a great tool in our effort to make Grand Rapids more welcoming for all people, and employers in particular, because it adds to the quality of life. And so I just think we have to do, with this, I think it hopefully will give us more confidence and more of a desire to really go all out and speak to the benefits of green space and the parks and how it actually helps tremendously in promoting our city, not just what's happening in our beloved downtown, but what's happening all throughout the city. So.
Yeah, well said. Particularly if we're going to meet our goals around park acquisition in some of our poorest neighborhoods.
Yep.
Yeah. Commissioner Moody?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I am definitely in favor of the park millage, even more so the evergreen. Maintenance is very important to me. When I ride through the city, I see certain areas of our city where it does not look like a park, but it looks like a different type of war zone to some degree, which has become not eye-appealing to anyone to want to go into the park to play or to do any type of engagement. I would hope that we would consider this millage being permanent so that we don't keep coming back doing the same thing over and over again. I say that because I lived across the street from a park for quite some time, and sometimes I would take my own lawnmower and go over and cut the grass. But it's important that I'd like to give the City of Grand Rapids some kudos, especially the Park Commission for doing a good job this year. And they need a pat on the back, and I do believe that we got a good park system in place right now. And I think we need to continue to improve. But I would like to see this millage permanent.
Thank you. All right, with that then, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right. Thank you, commissioners, and I'm going to excuse our city clerk so that he can take it from here. And next, I will turn it over to our city manager for an update and discussion on the human rights ordinance. So again, this was postponed from this morning's meeting to today, or to our 2 o'clock. So, city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I want to thank the staff and public for their feedback and work that's occurred since the April public hearing. We heard a lot of good feedback that caused the staff to go back, along working with our city attorney's office, and look at areas in which we could improve the human rights ordinance. As you know, we had the CRC and several other stakeholders provide good feedback on changing the governance model for our CRC, as well as updating some protections around housing, employment, public accommodation, and contracting. I think that's probably 95% of the ordinance, and unfortunately what got the most attention was the 5% that dealt with bias crime reporting. And that's important, and we heard a lot of good feedback from both sides of the issue, and took that feedback seriously and worked again with our city attorney's office, staff, and police department. And so here today, we want to provide an update on the work that's been done since, and also give our new police chief an opportunity to provide feedback on the portion that's related to bias crime reporting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our assistant to the city manager, who's also serving as our equity officer, Ms. Stacy Stout.
All right. Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm here, as the City Manager said, to present the work product of the Community Relations Commission, Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Labor Relations, City Attorney's Office, Police Department, and many, many community partners. That work product is a resolution to create and adopt the ordinance referred to as the Human Rights Ordinance. A brief reminder of how this came to be: we were approached by Lionel Lagrone from Link Up at the time to consider a more expansive and robust human rights ordinance than what the current CRC ordinance covers. The city, in partnership with the city's attorney's office, CRC, which I would like to notice that the chair of the CRC, Tommy Allen, is here today, and we had 2 members here earlier today. So I want to thank you for your leadership on this, as well as Patty Caudle, who helped lead this work. Together, they drafted the original ordinance that was presented to you on April 9th. Based on research and discussions with partners, the following changes you see listed and expansions were identified in the draft proposal presented on that day, April 9th. So we expanded definition sections for clarity and transparency. We refined prohibitions on discrimination and identified 4 primary areas. We added the bias crime reporting prohibition and made it a civil infraction to knowingly or recklessly report an individual who is an actual or perceived member of a protected class, has committed, may commit, or will commit a crime if such report is based in whole or in part on the individual's membership in a protected class and without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. I'd like to reiterate that the bias crime reporting prohibition is in no way a deterrent to reporting actual crimes or acts that cause reasonable suspicion. We want people, and we encourage people to cooperate with police for investigations. To elaborate further and to give the perspective of the GRPD, I welcome my colleague, Chief Payne.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners,
Chief.
City
Welcome.
Manager. As Stacy mentioned, this came about after a lot of robust discussion about this ordinance and what better way to serve the community. And as Stacy mentioned, this is not a deterrent for people to call the police department when they see actual crimes being committed. We've always encouraged that, and we will encourage that in the future. This will hopefully impact those that have hate in their hearts for whatever group that's out there, that they solely call us and to intervene in something that's not criminal in nature. We've had a lot of discussions about our resources, calling officers and putting them in those situations where we really shouldn't be there. Hopefully this ordinance will impact it and alleviate some of that along with the education. Plus the safety of the people that are involved in this. Having officers involved with people who are not in any shape or form criminal activity is just they're being called upon because of their whatever class they may be in, that's inappropriate. So we will continue to pursue cases in which somebody makes a false police report. This just adds another layer for us to be able to address it. We've discussed a lot about the educational component that will come with it, and hopefully we can educate the community on when and what they should do when they see criminal activity, and not to call whenever there's solely based on someone's class.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for your partnership and support. Outlined, and to continue with the bullet points, we also outlined and identified exemptions based on legal standards, and we expanded the CRC to 13 members to include more voices at the table. And lastly, we outlined complaint procedures and referral procedures that the Office of Diversity Inclusion, in partnership with the City Attorney's Office, will follow. Much of this ordinance is outlining that referral process to others. And then lastly, we specifically outlined the injunctive relief for violations of the ordinance that were previously implied. So the City Commission approved a resolution providing for the publication of a summary of the ordinance and scheduled a public hearing that was held on April 23rd. The Commission received testimony and subsequent correspondence from the public that were mostly in support of the ordinance. During the public hearing, specific concerns were raised regarding implementation, specifically about that section around bias crime reporting, which merited further discussion, refinement, and clarification, which is what we did. Following the public hearing, city leadership reviewed the public input and revised the ordinance in the following ways. We further clarified the complaint and investigation process. That's very clear in the new one. We outlined the referral process for investigations to be conducted by outside parties for complaints that fall under their jurisdictions, such as the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. So if it falls under their jurisdiction, now we have an actual process to make sure that they get those, a referral process, that they get those complaints. We added reference to the city's ordinance around false information to both the crime reporting section and the prosecution and penalty section. And we added familial status to the list of protected classes. We also added definitions for bias and retaliation. We provided clarity regarding responsibilities and the role of the CRC. They will not be investigating complaints, so we made that clear. We added a section around retaliation to protect individuals who bring forward complaints. And we also added a section granting the Office of Diversity and Inclusion the authority to issue citations under the ordinance. This ordinance is scheduled to be before the City Commission for approval and adoption on August 27th. Should this ordinance be adopted, we would work to do the following. We need to finalize standard operating procedures if it's approved, finalize partnership agreements with those external investigative agencies so we can track these referrals and outcomes, coordinate training with 911 dispatch. We already had a preliminary meeting with them, and they are eager to get that training on bias, but also learning more about the ordinance and the process. Should they get a call to them, someone making a complaint of a bias crime reporting, they want to know the process for that. So that's in the works. Expanded training with our staff, GRPD, City's Attorney's Office, so we're all on the same page. Publish a FAQ. And this is really important, and Chief Payne alluded to it. Create and launch a public awareness and communication strategy. That's very important, right? And so if we can reduce these calls, we want to do that. And we would work in partnership with GRPD and other partners. Finalize and launch the online and the hard copy complaint form. Digital divide is real, and so we want to make this as accessible as possible. With those partners and internal, we will also establish metrics and a data collection process regarding complaints, outcomes, and trends to be presented at least annually to this body. If you were to adopt this, we would ask the effective date of the ordinance be December 1, so we can finalize a lot of these steps before it starts, and we began, but we can't finalize unless it is approved. And then just know that the human rights ordinance would essentially replace the current CRC ordinance. And so if this was to be adopted on a future agenda, there would be a resolution to repeal the then would be outdated CRC ordinance. So I just want to clarify that. So that is the quick update on where we are in the history of the Human Rights Ordinance here in Grand Rapids. And so I now open the floor to questions. If I can.
Thank
And
you.
I do have several staff here to help too. Patty's here, Chief, and Brandon has been helping, as well as Sherry beside you.
Okay, great. All right, Commissioners, first, City Manager, anything you want to add?
Again, I want to thank the staff for their work. And I think related to the bias crime reporting, what I asked the staff to do is to be clear on when does the city have original jurisdiction and who in the city has original jurisdiction over certain types of complaints. So for the majority of the complaints, if they're employment related, if they're housing related, we are referring those to our partners, either through the Fair Housing Commission or through the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. Those opportunities where we have original jurisdiction is around complaints around sexual orientation, and now this new bias crime reporting element. And whenever there are complaints around sexual orientation, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion will work with the City Attorney's Office to determine the appropriate investigative process. If it is around bias crime reporting, we also, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion will work with the City Attorney's Office and the Police Department to determine the appropriate investigative process. And I don't want to speak too much for the City Attorney's Office or Police Department, but I'm assuming much of what will happen with that bias crime reporting will be similar, for lack of a better term, methodology or approach that you would use in a regular false crime reporting incident, but you're now layering using the lens of equity. And so, and I don't want the public to be confused about, we know in one sense we certainly want cooperation, as the chief has said, and in terms of solving crime and preventing crime. But we also, just as much as we are anti-violence, we want to be anti-racism and anti-discrimination. And you don't have to pick one or the other. You can do both. And I think that's where we are.
Thank you. All right, Commissioners, I'll open it up for questions or comments. Commissioner?
Yeah,
Commissioner Kelly?
I'm in support of this. We had a chance to review it before, and I do want to point out that this isn't unusual. In my term in office, we've had revisions before as needs arise. So this is, to some degree, business as usual, and just appreciate the support from the police department. We certainly understand to your comments, Chief, that you need to be focused on criminal activity, and quality of life issues in some cases, and not to be pulled away unnecessarily. So hopefully this will help you in that matter.
All right. Commissioners, other questions? Commissioner?
Yep, I just want to also add that I'm very pleased about how this has progressed, the revisions that were made. I know that this has been a significant work in progress. It started out, I think, with a very broad and a very, there was a lot there. And I think that with the Community Relations Commission, along with the Law Department and with Ms. Stout and others, I think that, and with GRPD, I think it's come a long way to really get at something that hopefully will deter someone from, discriminating against someone based on class or race or sexual orientation and such. And so I am very excited about it. And again, I'm hoping that it will actually serve as a model for other municipalities throughout the country, and most importantly, here in Michigan. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Yeah, I too want to express my support. Thank you to Tommy and the CRC, and but I also want to thank Stacy and Brandon and the legal department for, getting us the clarity that we need, because the way that you succinctly said it, City Manager Washington, is what we need to be able to say to the community so that it's real clear, it's understandable, people understand what the process is. And I want to thank you, Chief Payne, for standing up with it, because I think that that's really important as well. This is something that we're all embracing together. We're all in it together. And yet we have to make sure that, that there's a proper procedure for things. And so I look forward to an elevated discourse about bias, which exists in our community, in every community, and in each one of our hearts. And I think that this will help us to have that conversation so that we can truly ensure that everybody feels safe. Because there are a lot of people who don't feel safe because they're not sure how their neighbors feel about them and what their neighbors are going to do. And so I think that this is just going to elevate that discourse into the level that it needs to be at.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Stacy, I do have a question. You mentioned training for individuals who work in dispatch. I'm curious if other cities have specific trainings that they provide for their dispatch centers specific to bias and how to ask appropriate questions, filter those calls out. I'm just curious.
So should it be adopted, we had a preliminary conversation with dispatch supervisors, and they have a training manual to see what's in the manual that we could adapt and write into their manual, and looking at other cities as well as one of that. Because with any similar, and this would be historic, but so it's hard to say what other cities do when this is a new type of ordinance. But preliminary research says that you absolutely must almost start with 911 dispatch, because they're the receiver of the calls. So we're looking into that for sure, Mayor.
I just wonder if some of the cities that have done a lot of work, especially around racial equity, whether it's Seattle or Minneapolis, or there's a handful of cities who are kind of at the forefront, if they've done specific intensive training. And maybe Chief, do you know?
Yes.
Oh.
There is some specific training that we have looked at. We haven't gotten too far into it, but there is training out there specifically for 911 dispatchers in this area.
Great.
So we'll continue to look in it and see what we can come up with.
Good.
Yeah,
That's good to know.
Yep.
And Mayor, and it's for that reason, we want to be very deliberate in moving forward this ordinance. And so that is why the staff is asking for an effective date of December, so we can be as intentional as we can about putting all the components in the appropriate implementation together.
Great. So City Manager, process-wise, we'll have an opportunity to take a deeper look at some of the language that's been amended and revised that's part of this update, and then walk us through your timeline and thoughts. I know.
So our intention is to come back at our next commission meeting. And since you've had the language in the revised language before you, to ask for the passage of the ordinance with that future effective date. And I want to reflect on the conversation I had earlier about balance, because we do know that this in itself will not solve all the issues that we have regarding both bias, discrimination, and violence in the community. So the following meeting, we will also be asking your consideration around adopting our gun ordinance, our replica weapons ordinance, as well as this will not require, those two actions will require your vote, both the human rights ordinance and the replica weapons ordinance, but the chief will also be releasing by the end of this month. I've asked him to release the department's policy on dealing with when to cooperate with federal authorities when dealing with foreign nationals. So I'm an immigration policy. And so those will be the next steps. Hopefully that we'll be able to get that done. Two of those by the next meeting, and I'm looking forward to that policy by the end of the month. Again, that does not require commission approval. It just requires departmental policy, but we will certainly make the community and commission aware of the department's policy. I believe the department has done some preliminary engagement with stakeholders.
Great, thank you. All right, commissioners, any other questions or comments? Appreciate this update, and thank you, everyone, for your willingness to push it back a little bit. And then, commissioners, as I indicated earlier, you know what, actually, Joel would not be happy, because this is a special meeting. I need to open it up for public comment, or before I close this portion and we go back into executive session. So if anyone is in the audience and you would like to make a comment, we have a few rules. One, we ask that you share your name, the city that you live in, and I'll give you up to 3 minutes to speak. All right. All right.
Hi, Stephanie Adams, and I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Grand Rapids Parks, located downtown Grand Rapids. I am just going to say thank you, first and foremost, for allowing their voters to move forward with the millage passing, and looking forward to seeing what happens with that. I took a group of citizens on a picnic in the park lunch just today, where I was reminded from someone who sits on the mayor's millennial cabinet, coming from New York City, that they obviously have housing, lots and lots of it, but very little green space, and they take very good care of their spaces and make sure that they're green. And there's a balance to all of things, and we see that all the time. So I want to thank you for your constant support of parks and green spaces, and especially trees in the city of Grand Rapids. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Okay, with that, I'll close that public comment period, and commissioners, I will meet you back downstairs in the city attorney's office.
All righty.